He gave them 28 years of blood, sweat, and gears. Then they threw him away like scrap metal. But Bruce Reynolds isn't done yet. When betrayal meets ingenuity, sparks will fly. What happens when the mechanic everyone underestimated comes roaring back? Bruce Reynolds had always been a man of routine. For nearly 3 decades, his days began before dawn, the hum of engines and the scent of motor oil greeting him like an old friend. At Oakwood Auto, he wasn't just a mechanic, he was an institution. His hands, calloused and stained with grease, carried stories of loyalty, craftsmanship, and resilience. Customers trusted him implicitly, knowing that when Bruce worked on their cars, they wouldn't break down again for miles. Yet, despite his unwavering dedication, no one, not even Bruce himself, could have predicted how swiftly it would all unravel. It started with Corey Pullman. Corey was young, ambitious, and ruthlessly efficient. Fresh out of business school, he'd been brought in by corporate investors to streamline operations at Oakwood Auto. To Bruce, those words were code for something far less palatable: cutting costs at any expense. Within weeks of Corey's arrival, seasoned mechanics were replaced by inexperienced teenagers willing to work for minimum wage. Tools that had served the shop faithfully for years were discarded in favor of cheaper alternatives. Loyalty meant nothing to Corey. Profit margins were everything. At first, Bruce tried to ignore the changes. He buried himself in his work, focusing on the rhythmic precision of tightening bolts or diagnosing engine problems. But the tension between tradition and innovation grew unbearable. Conversations around the garage shifted from camaraderie to complaints about slashed hours and unrealistic quotas. Bruce watched as colleagues who'd stood beside him for years packed up their lockers, some shaking his hand with tears in their eyes before walking out the door for the last time. Then came the Monday morning Bruce would never forget. He arrived at the shop early, as usual, sipping coffee from a thermos emblazoned with the logo of a local racing team. The air was crisp, and sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. It should have been a peaceful start to the week, but the knot in Bruce's stomach told him otherwise. He spotted Corey pacing near the office, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the part of a man on a mission. "Bruce," Corey called, his voice sharp and clipped. "A word, please." The tone set off alarm bells in Bruce's mind, but he followed Corey into the cramped office without protest. Inside, the walls were lined with charts and graphs detailing efficiency metrics and cost analyses. None of it made sense to Bruce, whose understanding of success was rooted in tangible results rather than abstract numbers. Still, he took a seat across from Corey, gripping his thermos tightly as if it might anchor him to reality. "You've been with us a long time," Corey began, leaning back in his chair with an air of forced casualness. 28 years, right?" "That's correct," Bruce replied, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. "Well?" Corey paused, flipping through papers on his desk as though searching for the right words. When he finally looked up, there was no warmth in his expression, only cold calculation. "Unfortunately, we've decided to move in a different direction. Your position is being eliminated." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Bruce stared at Corey, trying to process what he'd just heard. Eliminated? After 28 years of service? It felt surreal, like the ground beneath him had been pulled away. "I don't understand," Bruce said slowly, setting the thermos down on the desk. "I'm one of the best mechanics this place has ever had. You can't just get rid of me because I cost more than some kid fresh out of trade school." Corey smirked, a smug expression that twisted his features into something almost unrecognizable. "Times change, Bruce. This isn't about skill, it's about numbers. We need to cut costs, and unfortunately that means letting go of, well, relics like you." The word hit Bruce like a punch to the gut. Relics, as if he were some outdated piece of machinery gathering dust in the corner. Anger bubbled up inside him, hot and uncontrollable, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. It would only give Corey the satisfaction of seeing him crack. Instead, Bruce stood, his movements deliberate and measured. He reached for his toolbox, the same one he'd carried with him since his first day at Oakwood Auto. Its dents and scratches told stories of hard work and perseverance, qualities Corey clearly didn't value. As he turned to leave, Bruce stopped in the doorway and glanced back at Corey. The younger man was already engrossed in his papers, dismissing Bruce as though he were already forgotten. "You'll regret this," Bruce said quietly, his voice low but laced with conviction. "Mark my words." Corey barely looked up. "We'll see about that." Driving away from Oakwood Auto for the last time, Bruce gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him, heavier than he'd anticipated. For 28 years, he'd poured his heart and soul into that place, and now it was gone, ripped away without a second thought. But as the miles rolled by and the city gave way to open roads, something else began to stir within him. Beneath the anger and humiliation lay a spark, a quiet determination fueled by decades of pride and expertise. Bruce wasn't ready to fade into obscurity, and deep down he knew exactly where to start. The days following Bruce's dismissal from Oakwood Auto were a blur of restless nights and aimless wandering. Each morning, he woke with the same hollow feeling in his chest, as though a piece of him had been carved out and discarded along with his toolbox. He tried to distract himself, fixing up old cars in his driveway, tinkering with projects that didn't need fixing, but nothing filled the void left by the loss of his job. For nearly 3 decades, Oakwood Auto had been more than just a workplace. It had been his identity. Without it, Bruce felt untethered, adrift in a world that no longer seemed to have a place for him. Desperation began to creep in. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, their due dates glaring at him like silent accusations. Sleep eluded him, and when it did come, it was haunted by dreams of engines breaking down and tools slipping through his fingers. He spent hours scrolling through job listings online, applying to every mechanic position within a 100-mile radius, but the responses were few and far between. Those who did reply often ghosted him after learning his age or asking why he'd left his previous employer. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bruce sat alone at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. His gaze drifted to the wall, where an old photograph hung, a faded snapshot of him and Pete Anderson, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. They weren't blood-related, but Pete had been one of the closest friends Bruce ever had. A fellow mechanic with a knack for storytelling, Pete had always dreamed big, even if his ambitions often outpaced reality. Together, they'd shared countless beers and conversations about life, work, and everything in between. Pete's name brought a flicker of memory to Bruce's mind. Rusty Wrenches, the small, ramshackle garage Pete had poured his heart into for years. It wasn't much, but it had been enough for Pete to call it home. Bruce remembered the way Pete used to talk about the place, his eyes lighting up as he described plans to expand and modernize. But those dreams had died with Pete, or so Bruce had thought. Curiosity got the better of him. He pulled out his phone and searched for Rusty Wrenches, half expecting to find nothing but a dusty relic of the past. To his surprise, the address still existed, though the reviews were sparse and outdated. Scrolling further, he stumbled upon an obituary for Pete Anderson. The date was recent, just 6 months ago. Pete had passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack, leaving behind his daughter, Alicia, and the crumbling remains of his once-beloved garage. Bruce stared at the screen, his throat tightening. Pete was gone. The realization hit him harder than he expected, not just because of the loss of a dear friend, but because it meant that Rusty Wrenches, the symbol of Pete's legacy, was likely rotting away somewhere, forgotten and abandoned. Something stirred inside Bruce then, a mixture of nostalgia and purpose. If anyone could breathe new life into that old garage, it was him. The next morning, Bruce tracked down Alicia Anderson's contact information. She was listed as the executor of Pete's estate, her name attached to a modest landscaping business she ran on the outskirts of town. When Bruce called, she sounded hesitant, almost wary, as though expecting another bill collector or lawyer. "Alicia," Bruce said when she answered. "This is Bruce Reynolds. I worked with your dad for years. We were close." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about you," Alicia replied cautiously. What can I do for you? I wanted to ask about Rusty Wrenches, Bruce continued. I heard it's been closed since your dad passed. Another pause, this one heavier. Yeah, it's still there, Alicia admitted. But it's not much to look at anymore. Honestly, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not exactly handy, and I don't have the time or money to fix it up. I'd like to take a look, Bruce said firmly. Maybe we can figure something out. Alicia hesitated before agreeing to meet him at the garage later that afternoon. When Bruce arrived, he found her standing outside the building, arms crossed and a skeptical expression on her face. She was younger than he'd imagined, maybe in her early 30s, with sharp features and dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her clothes were practical, jeans and a flannel shirt, but there was a weariness in her posture that suggested she'd been carrying too many burdens for too long. This is it, Alicia said, gesturing toward the structure. Go ahead. Knock yourself out. Bruce stepped closer, his heart sinking as he took in the state of the place. Rusty Wrenches looked like it had been ravaged by time and neglect. Windows were cracked or boarded up, graffiti marred the walls, and weeds sprouted through the cracks in the pavement. Inside, the air smelled musty, and dust coated every surface. Tools lay scattered across workbenches, rusting away in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. Despite the decay, Bruce saw potential. Beneath the layers of grime and disrepair, the bones of the garage were solid. With some effort and the right team, it could be restored to its former glory. He turned to Alicia, who stood watching him with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking this place deserves a second chance, Bruce replied. And so do I. Alicia raised an eyebrow. You're serious? You want to reopen this dump? It's not a dump, Bruce shot back, his voice tinged with defensiveness. It's a diamond in the rough, and if you're willing to let me try, I think I can make it work. After a long moment, Alicia sighed. Fine, do what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you. Over the next few weeks, Bruce threw himself into the project with a fervor he hadn't felt in years. He enlisted the help of Hank O'Neill, a retired mechanic who owed him a favor, and together they began clearing out the debris and repairing the most urgent structural issues. Word spread among Bruce's old network of colleagues and customers, and soon volunteers started showing up on weekends to lend a hand. Some brought tools, others brought food, and a few even offered financial support. Slowly but surely, Rusty Wrenches began to transform. But progress came with challenges. Supplies were expensive and funds were tight. Bruce often stayed late into the night, poring over budgets and sketching out plans for the layout of the shop. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that he was chasing a lost cause. Yet every time he felt like giving up, he reminded himself of Pete's dream and his own determination to prove Corey wrong. Then, disaster struck. One Friday night, after a particularly grueling week of renovations, Bruce locked up the garage and headed home. The next morning, he returned to find the place vandalized. Windows that had been painstakingly repaired were shattered again. Graffiti scrawled across the walls in bold, angry letters. Tools that had been carefully organized were strewn about, some missing entirely. Bruce stood frozen in the doorway, his fists clenched at his sides. Who would do this? And why? As he surveyed the damage, a single thought echoed in his mind. They're trying to scare me off. But Bruce Reynolds wasn't the kind of man who scared easily. With renewed resolve, he set to work cleaning up the mess. This time, he installed security cameras and motion sensors, determined to catch whoever was behind the vandalism. More importantly, he refused to let fear dictate his future. Rusty Wrenches wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that even in ruin, there could be hope, and Bruce intended to see it rise again. The grand reopening of Rusty Wrenches was nothing short of a miracle. Against all odds, Bruce Reynolds had turned a crumbling relic into a fully operational garage. Word spread quickly, first among his old network of loyal customers who remembered Bruce's skill and integrity, then through social media posts and local word of mouth. People were drawn not just by the promise of honest workmanship, but also by the underdog story of a betrayed mechanic rebuilding his life from scratch. From the outside, Rusty Wrenches still bore the scars of its past. A faded sign hanging slightly crooked above the entrance, patches of paint peeling off the walls. But inside, it hummed with energy. Alicia had taken charge of organizing the office space, her sharp eye for detail ensuring that invoices were filed neatly and appointments scheduled efficiently. Hank O'Neill worked alongside Bruce, mentoring younger mechanics who occasionally stopped by to learn tricks of the trade. Together, they formed an unlikely family, united by shared goals and mutual respect. Business boomed almost immediately. Customers praised the fair prices and meticulous service, often leaving glowing reviews online. One client, a truck driver named Earl, became a regular after Bruce fixed his engine in record time, refusing to charge extra despite the complexity of the job. "You remind me of the good old days," Earl said during one visit, shaking Bruce's hand firmly, "when mechanics cared more about people than profit." But success came at a cost. As Rusty Wrenches gained traction, Corey Pullman grew increasingly agitated. At Oakwood Auto, business had begun to falter. Longtime patrons defected, citing dissatisfaction with the quality of repairs and the cold efficiency of the new staff. Rumors circulated about declining customer satisfaction scores and missed revenue targets. For Corey, whose reputation depended on delivering results, this was unacceptable. It didn't take long for him to act. One chilly Tuesday evening, as Bruce locked up Rusty Wrenches after a long day, he noticed something strange. Several of their most expensive tools, a hydraulic lift Bruce, a diagnostic scanner, even a set of precision wrenches, were missing. At first, he thought he might have misplaced them in the chaos of the day. But when he checked the inventory log, his suspicions hardened into certainty. Someone had stolen them. Frustration boiled over into anger. Bruce stormed into the makeshift break room where Alicia and Hank were reviewing invoices. "We've been hit," he announced grimly, slamming the clipboard onto the table. "Tools are gone. Expensive ones." Alicia frowned, flipping through receipts. "How is that possible? We installed cameras last week." "That's what I want to know," Bruce muttered, already heading back toward the garage floor. Sure enough, the footage revealed two masked figures sneaking in late at night, loading equipment into a van parked outside. There was no clear view of their faces, but Bruce recognized the logo on the side of the vehicle instantly. Oakwood Auto. Corey wasn't playing fair. The next morning, Bruce confronted Corey directly. He drove to Oakwood Auto, parking his battered pickup truck right in front of the sleek glass doors. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Employees scurried around nervously while Corey paced behind the counter, scrolling through reports on his tablet. When Bruce walked in, heads turned, conversations halted, and Corey looked up with thinly veiled disdain. "Back so soon?" Corey sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. "I thought you'd be too busy playing hero at your little pet project." Bruce ignored the jab, stepping closer until he loomed over the younger man. "Cut the crap, Corey. You sent thugs to steal from us. Don't deny it. I have proof." Corey smirked, unfazed. "Proof? Of what? That you can't secure your own property? Sounds like incompetence to me." "You think you're untouchable," Bruce growled, his voice low and dangerous. "But mark my words, you'll pay for this." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Corey's face, but he quickly masked it with bravado. "Go ahead, make threats. See if anyone cares about some washed-up mechanic trying to play Robin Hood." Bruce clenched his fists, resisting the urge to lunge forward. Instead, he turned and left, vowing silently to fight back, not with violence, but with strategy. Back at Rusty Wrenches, Bruce called an emergency meeting with Alicia, Hank, and a few trusted volunteers. They gathered in the break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Tension hung thick in the air as Bruce laid out the situation. "They're coming after us," he said bluntly, "sabotaging our tools, spreading lies about subpar repairs. It's all part of Corey's plan to shut us down." Alicia crossed her arms, her expression fierce. "So what do we do? Let him win?" "Hell no," Bruce replied, a spark of determination igniting in his eyes. "We adapt. If he wants to play dirty, we'll show him we're tougher." Their plan was simple yet effective. First, they launched a crowdfunding campaign to replace the stolen tools, framing it as a community effort to support local businesses. Within days, donations poured in, from retirees grateful for Bruce's decades of service to young families eager to see small-town values triumph over corporate greed. Local news outlets picked up the story, casting Rusty Wrenches as a beacon of resilience. Second, they doubled down on transparency. Every repair order included a detailed breakdown of costs, and customers were invited to observe the work being done. Bruce made it a point to personally explain each step of the process, fostering trust and loyalty. Even Earl, the truck driver, recorded a heartfelt testimonial praising Rusty Wrenches and posted it online, where it quickly went viral. Finally, Bruce decided to confront Corey's smear campaign head-on. Using the security footage from the theft, he created a video exposing Oakwood Auto's unethical tactics. The clip ended with a direct challenge. "If you value honesty and hard work, bring your business to Rusty Wrenches. Together, we'll prove that integrity always wins." When the video hit social media, it exploded. Comments flooded in, many condemning Corey's behavior and applauding Bruce's perseverance. Some former Oakwood Auto employees reached out privately, offering information about other shady practices within the company. The tide was turning. Despite these victories, the battle wasn't over. Corey retaliated by slashing prices at Oakwood Auto, undercutting Rusty Wrenches in a desperate attempt to retain customers. For a brief period, the pressure mounted. Supplies ran low, and tempers flared among the team. But Bruce refused to give up. He reminded everyone why they'd started this journey: to honor Pete's legacy, to stand against injustice, and to prove that true craftsmanship could never be replaced. As weeks turned into months, Rusty Wrenches continued to thrive. The sabotage only strengthened their resolve, uniting them in ways they hadn't anticipated. And though Corey remained a looming threat, Bruce knew they were winning. Not just the war for customers, but the fight for dignity and respect. The final showdown was inevitable, but when it came, Bruce would be ready. The tension between Rusty Wrenches and Oakwood Auto reached a boiling point one stormy Friday night. Rain hammered against the tin roof of Bruce's garage, the sound blending with the rhythmic clinking of tools as the team worked late to finish a rush order for a loyal customer. Despite the chaos outside, the mood inside was calm, almost too calm. Bruce had felt it brewing for days, the sense that Corey Pullman was about to make his move. And tonight he was proven right. Around midnight, just as Alicia was locking up the office, headlights pierced through the rain-soaked darkness. A black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the garage, its tires skidding on the slick pavement. Out stepped Corey Pullman himself, flanked by two burly men who looked more like enforcers than mechanics. Their presence was unmistakable, an intimidation tactic meant to send a clear message. "Bruce," Corey called out, his voice sharp and commanding despite the howling wind. "We need to talk." Bruce emerged from the shadows of the workshop, wiping grease-streaked hands on a rag. His expression was unreadable, but there was steel in his gaze. "Talk? You're trespassing on private property, Corey. Whatever you've got to say it quick." Corey smirked, though there was an edge of desperation in his eyes. "You really think you can win this little game of yours? I've got connections, resources, and money, things you'll never have. Shut down your operation now, or I'll bury you." Alicia stepped forward, her arms crossed defiantly. "Is that supposed to scare us? Because it sounds like empty threats from someone who's losing." Corey ignored her, focusing instead on Bruce. "This isn't over," he snarled. "If you don't back off, I'll ruin everything you've built here. Mark my words." What Corey didn't realize was that their confrontation wasn't happening in private. Several customers who had stayed late to pick up their vehicles were watching silently from the sidelines, filming the exchange on their phones. One of them, a young mechanic named Tyler who idolized Bruce, live-streamed the entire scene to social media. Within minutes, the video began circulating online, drawing outrage from viewers who saw Corey's aggression for what it was: bullying. Bruce stood firm, refusing to be cowed. "You want to threaten me?" he said, his voice low but carrying enough weight to silence the rain momentarily. "Go ahead. But know this, you're not just threatening me. You're threatening every person who believes in hard work, honesty, and doing the right thing. And trust me, Corey, people remember bullies." Corey's face twisted with fury. He turned to leave, barking orders at his henchmen to follow him. But before they could retreat, a loud voice rang out from behind them. It was Hank O'Neill, standing near the garage entrance with a sledgehammer slung over his shoulder. "You come back here again," Hank growled, his tone leaving no room for misinterpretation, "and we'll make sure you regret it." The threat hung heavy in the air, and Corey hesitated, glancing nervously at his companions. Finally, he climbed into the SUV and sped away, tires squealing in protest. By morning, the video of the confrontation had gone viral. Comment sections exploded with support for Rusty Wrenches, while Oakwood Auto faced mounting criticism. Former employees came forward with allegations of unethical practices under Corey's management, from falsified repair invoices to unsafe working conditions. Investors grew uneasy, questioning whether their association with Oakwood Auto aligned with their public image. By Monday afternoon, corporate headquarters issued a statement announcing Corey's immediate termination. But the fallout didn't stop there. With its reputation in shambles, Oakwood Auto struggled to retain clients. Bills went unpaid, lawsuits piled up, and within weeks, the company declared bankruptcy. When the assets went up for auction, Bruce saw an opportunity and seized it. Standing in the cavernous expanse of Oakwood Auto's main garage months later, Bruce couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. The place looked different now, brighter, cleaner, infused with new energy, but the echoes of his past still lingered. He had purchased the facility at a fraction of its original value, merging it with Rusty Wrenches to create something entirely unique. A hybrid workspace where seasoned veterans like himself and Hank shared knowledge with eager apprentices fresh out of trade school. Alicia played a crucial role in overseeing operations, her organizational skills ensuring both locations ran smoothly. She also spearheaded outreach programs aimed at training underserved youth in automotive repair, giving them a chance to build careers in a field often overlooked by traditional education systems. Together, they transformed what had once been symbols of betrayal and greed into thriving hubs of collaboration and innovation. One day, as Bruce stood watching a group of teenagers huddled around a vintage Mustang, eagerly listening to Hank explain the intricacies of carburetor tuning, Alicia approached him with a small smile. "You did it, Bruce," she said softly. "You turned Pete's dream into something even bigger than he imagined." Bruce nodded, though his thoughts drifted briefly to Corey. He wondered if the man had learned anything from his downfall, if he understood that power without integrity was meaningless. But those musings quickly faded as he focused on the present. This moment, the hum of activity, the laughter of apprentices, the satisfaction of knowing he'd made a difference, that was what mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the garage floor, Bruce locked up for the night. Revenge hadn't healed him, redemption had. And as he drove home beneath a star-speckled sky, he knew that life, much like an engine, required patience, precision, and care to keep running smoothly. And sometimes, when all seemed lost, a spark of hope was all it took to reignite the fire. This story reminds us that resilience often hides where we least expect it. Would you risk everything to prove your worth? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this tale of grit and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more unforgettable stories.